They worked the land from dawn until dusk, bent under the weight of their lord's demands. They fed the kingdom, yet many went to bed hungry. Today, we're uncovering what the average medieval peasant actually ate. Not the feasts of knights and kings, but the humble meals that kept millions alive. Welcome to Arena of Ages. In the Middle Ages, life for the common peasant was defined by labor, faith, and survival. Most were serfs, legally bound to the land of their lord. They owed not only rent, but also service, days spent plowing, harvesting, and hauling grain not for their own families but for the church and the nobility. Every year began and ended with the same oath, a vow of obedience sworn upon the Bible. And in return for the right to live on the land, peasants worked their lord's fields and paid heavy tithes to the church, often 1/10 of everything they owned. That tithe could be money, but most had none to give. So they offered seed, grain, or animals, leaving their families with barely enough to survive the following year's planting. The church stored these tithes in great barns, but much of it spoiled or was eaten by rats. In 1395, the French chronicler Jean Froissart wrote that peasants were bound by law to plow the fields of their masters, harvest their corn, gather it into barns, mow and carry home the hay, and perform all manner of tasks of this kind. In other words, their time and strength were not their own. Life and shelter. Timber-framed wattle and daub cottage under overcast sky. Smoke curls from thatch. Most peasants lived in rough, timber-framed homes packed with straw for insulation. There was one room, a hearth, a bed of straw, and little else. Families, and often their livestock, slept under the same roof. Cows, pigs, and chickens were brought indoors each night to protect them from wolves, thieves, or the cold. The result? Warmth, yes, but also fleas, lice, and disease. The air was thick with smoke, the floor muddy, and sanitation almost non-existent. There were no toilets. Waste was thrown into the street or the nearest stream, often the same place where water was drawn for cooking. Meat. The luxury of the poor peasants rarely ate meat. When they did, it was from their own animals, usually slaughtered when too old to produce milk or eggs. Cows were precious for dairy. When butchered, every part was used: hide for leather, bones for tools, sinew for thread. Pigs were the true treasure. Hardy and able to forage anywhere, they fed themselves on scraps, roots, and even garbage. When slaughtered in autumn, nothing went to waste. Blood became pudding, intestines became sausage casings, fat was rendered for cooking, and ham was cured for winter. Hunting was dangerous and illegal. Forests belonged to kings and lords, and poaching deer could mean death. Instead, peasants set snares for rabbits, hares, and sometimes birds. Hedgehogs, badgers, and even crows found their way into peasant pots when famine struck. After the devastation of the Black Death in the 14th century, with fewer mouths to feed, meat became slightly more available. For a brief time, even the poor could taste what had once been reserved for nobles. Meanwhile, the nobility dined on extravagance. Their feasts included roasted swans, peacocks, and even cats or hedgehogs baked into pies. They served meats drowned in spiced sauces, like cameline, a rich blend of wine, bread, and cinnamon. One English king was said to have served hundreds of hares and rabbits at a single Christmas feast, while the poor outside scraped together turnips and onions. Religion shaped not only daily life, but diet. The church banned meat on numerous fast days, Wednesdays, Fridays, and during Lent, which meant that peasants often went weeks without a single bite of meat. Fish became the substitute. Salted herring, dried cod, eels, and lampreys filled their diet. Rivers and ponds teemed with life, and in coastal villages, the sea provided endlessly, if one could afford the salt to preserve it. Lampreys, an eel-like parasite, were considered a delicacy. King Henry I of England reportedly died after eating too many. For peasants, fish was a blessing from God, both food and faith made visible. Bread, the great equalizer. Bread was the foundation of life. Every class ate it, but its color revealed its maker's fortune. The rich ate soft, white loaves of wheat. The poor baked dark, coarse bread from rye, oats, or barley. The browner your bread, the poorer you were. When crops failed, peasants made famine bread from peas, acorns, and even tree bark. It filled the stomach, but not the body. In cities, you could buy bread baked from mixed grains, sometimes sweetened with honey or ale. In villages, families took turns using the communal oven, paying their lord for the privilege. In noble halls, bread served as the first plate. Thick, stale loaves called trenchers that soaked up juices from roasted meat before being thrown to servants or beggars. Ale mead and daily drink peasants didn't drink water if they could avoid it. It was often unsafe. Instead, they drank small ale, a weak, lightly fermented beer safe enough for children. It was brewed from barley or oats, flavored with herbs or berries, and provided both hydration and calories. Cider and mead were rarer but treasured. Mead made from honey and spices was especially loved in medieval Ireland and monasteries. On long workdays, peasants drank constantly, sometimes a gallon or more of weak ale each day. It wasn't drunkenness, it was survival. Fruits, vegetables, and the humble garden. In the peasant garden, everything had a purpose. Cabbages, leeks, onions, peas, and beans formed the base of most meals. Herbs like parsley, sage, and thyme added flavor where spices were far too costly. Vegetables weren't eaten raw. It was believed uncooked produce caused disease. Instead, everything went into the pot, boiled, stewed, or baked. Fruits like apples, pears, cherries, and berries were stewed or dried. In mountain regions, chestnuts replaced grain, ground into flour or roasted in winter. Pottage, the meal of the masses. At the heart of every peasant home simmered a pot, sometimes the same pot for years. This was pottage, a bubbling mix of grains, water, herbs, and whatever could be spared. In better times, it might include a scrap of meat or fish. In poor ones, just cabbage and leeks. The pot stayed over the fire all day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner drawn from the same brew. The longer it cooked, the thicker it became, until it resembled a gray, soupy paste. It was monotonous, but it sustained millions through centuries of hunger. Dairy and daily fuel. Cows, goats, and sheep provided milk, butter, and cheese, but rarely fresh. Without refrigeration, milk soured quickly, so peasants drank buttermilk or whey from cheese-making. Hard cheeses, preserved for winter, were eaten with bread and ale, a full meal in itself. These simple foods, bread, cheese, and ale, formed the base of the medieval diet. They gave enough energy to plow fields, dig trenches, and carry wood from sunrise to sunset. The role of the church and the rhythm of faith. Faith touched every meal. Every bite was taken under the watchful eye of God and the church. Food was not only nourishment, it was moral. To fast was to purify. To feast was to celebrate divine mercy. During Lent, when the church forbade meat, milk, eggs, and even cheese, the poor endured 6 weeks of monotony. Salted fish, vegetables, and bread, often just once a day. Those who broke the fast risked confession or punishment. Only children, the elderly, and travelers were spared. How the peasants endured. Despite all hardship, peasants found ways to survive, through fishing, farming, foraging, and community. They gathered wild herbs, mushrooms, berries, and nuts from the woods. They learned which weeds could fill a stew and which berries could poison it. Their diet may seem humble, but it was remarkably balanced. Grains for energy, beans for protein, and herbs for healing. So when we imagine the Middle Ages, we picture kings and knights feasting under candlelight. But the real story, the story of survival, belongs to the peasants. They built the world from the ground up, sustained not by gold or power, but by bread, ale, and hope. Because in the end, it wasn't the nobility who kept medieval Europe alive. It was the people who worked, prayed, and endured, one bowl of pottage at a time.